Good evening. I'd like to call the December 3rd, 2018 meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. We will start by calling the roll. Mrs. Thomas.
Mr. Rock?
Here.
Mr. Wiseman?
Here.
Mr. Sums? Mrs. Pardee?
Here.
Mr. Ertl?
Here.
Mrs. Cameron?
Present.
Mrs. Wise?
Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Sims?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Pardee, second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Will all who are able please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item up is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion? I note that everyone should have a copy of the draft minutes of November 19, 2018.
Mayor, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Mr. Rock. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Pass.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Next item up is comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. Total time allowed is 15 minutes per meeting unless otherwise permitted by the council. If you care to address the city at this juncture, please step up to the podium, speak into the microphone, and state your name and address for the record so that you may be heard and duly recorded in the minutes.
Good evening, I'm Kate Euler. I live on Fenwick Road now. I've lived in University Heights for 54 years. Mayor, there was a lot of talk about the reducing the taxes. I know that was on Councilman Rex, his information for election. And so I'd like to know how that's progressing. And the reason is, when I sold real estate, University Heights was the hottest place to sell real estate. You could list a house and it would be sold in 24 hours.
Wow.
And now we have lots of beautiful houses for sale. And a lot of people say it's because of the taxes. So I'd like to know how this is the progress is on that tax reduction, the income tax reduction, I presume. It was the city.
Sorry, that was just 1 minute. You may proceed.
The city, the taxes that were proposed to be reduced, we're looking forward to that. So, whenever you can get that together, thank you.
Thank you. Understood, Mrs. Euler.
If I could comment, if I could.
Very well, Mr. Roger.
So we have a new administration now. With that, we have a new budget, and a few members of council are still interested in reviewing the credit for the REIT tax. I said a few. There's a few that are still interested in reviewing the credit for the REIT tax program. We really want to see a whole year's worth of budget play out so that we see if this is still the fiscally responsible thing to do. So stay tuned. It's not going away. It's not happening right this second, but stay tuned.
We're waiting in bated breath.
Very good. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would care to address the city at this time?
Good evening, Council, Mayor.
Good evening.
Keith Ganner, former firefighter who's in University Heights Fire. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you all for the wonderful send-off and the proclamation and the words of encouragement for the future. And it was really a wonderful day last week. And I'm still sticking around to see what you guys are up to. I have an interest. I think the city's going a great direction. And I'll be around. So thank you all very much.
Well, I'm glad you'll be here because I still have one of your coffee cups.
You can hang on to it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Ms. Weiser.
Is there anyone else who would care to address the city?
I believe Ms. Weiser. Can you
Well,
have something
she's
to
here,
say?
but I don't know if she has anything she wants to say or not, so I will,
Don't you have something to say, what?
No, I don't have anything to say.
What?
oh, that's a
I'm gonna
first.
mark this down on my diary.
Bill, get up and say something to her if you want.
Okay, okay.
You have a diary?
Very good. If there's nobody else, then we will we'll close out comments from the audience and move on to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action. I would like to start out this evening by talking about leaf collection. If it seems like it's been 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, you may be right. Some streets have not been collected since November 5th or 6th. It may seem hard to believe, but we are on our 8th pass around the city with the leaf vacs. But at the same time, please note that the 7th pass began on Monday, November 5th, and ended on Saturday, November 17th, 13 days. The 8th pass began also on Saturday, November 17th, and continues today. And we are on the 17th day of the 8th pass, but that's also the 12th working day, which includes the weekend days where we offered overtime, including that Saturday, November 17th, which was the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And this past weekend, where we had 15 service employees sign up for overtime on Saturday, December 1st, and 13 sign up for Sunday. I was telling people 13 and 9, but then I looked again at the list and counted again. I would have to check with Mr. Picorni as to how many actually showed up. But the leaf pickups with the vacuum crews is a time-consuming process. Please consider this. We have 32 miles of streets in our city, so counting both sides of the street, that is 64 miles of tree lawn. And 64 miles is the distance from this city hall to Conneaut Lake Park, Pennsylvania. And our men are out there in crews of 3 or 4, one man driving the truck, one man operating the vacuum hose, and 1 or 2 guys on foot raking the tree lawns. This is a slow, labor-intensive process. Even with 2 straight days of nothing but leaf pickup over the weekend, these are the streets we got done. Claridge Oval, Charney between Meadowbrook and Claridge Oval, Fenwick between Meadowbrook and Traymore, Rubyvale, Lafayette, Erdley, Bethany, Grenville, Traymore between Hillbrook and Warrensville, Charney between Hillbrook and Edgerton. And that's it. We also have 4 temps working on the leaf crews, and they've been here since late October, and we've spent $7,592.14.
Say what?
$7,592.14 through November 18th on them. And by the time this is over, that number will have doubled and more. Any time of the year, if we're not operating leaf vacs, residents are welcome to bag their leaves. And at this time of the year, when we are operating leaf vacs, residents are still welcome to bag their leaves. If you find it imperative to get your leaves off your tree lawn faster, yes, you may bag them. And yard waste bags are picked up from your curbs on or about your regular trash day. This is my first leaf season as your mayor. I could call it my first fall season, but it doesn't seem like anything fell until very recently. And the oak trees still have not fallen. I'm looking around at neighboring communities and everyone is behind. I drove through Beechwood today and saw leaf piles on their tree lawns. Solon, Hudson, Cleveland Heights, everyone is playing catch up on leaves. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this not just now, but for the long term. And I'm seeing inefficiencies to correct for next year. But there are things, these are things that we will not be able to implement until at least next year. But even with improvements, there has to be some reasonable expectations. Leaf collection is not a weekly event. It is a seasonal event. And by the end of the season, we will have collected the leaves off your tree lawn. Please just have them ready. Now, many residents have asked, when is the last day? Well, we cannot tell you that. And when we say that, we're not being cute. But when it takes up to 2 weeks or more to do a single pass through the city, then there is no singular date that applies to every street as the last day. If we tried to announce a last day, that was actually the last day that we were operating leaf vacs, then there are bound to be residents who would put out leaves that final night, and then those leaves wouldn't get picked up. So my advice is this: if you want your leaves vacuumed off your tree lawn, please get them onto your tree lawn now, this week, or this weekend, next week at the absolute latest. Or you may miss out. And I do recall that first week of January when I first got here, getting a few phone calls wondering if the leaf vac would be out. And the answer then was no. And the answer this coming January will again be no. Leaf season will end this month. Now, since the last council meeting, the Saturday after Thanksgiving was Small Business Saturday in University Heights. Over 30 businesses in our city participated in our inaugural effort in this national event. The University Heights Library was the hospitality center. Whole Foods and Bialy's Bagels provided pastries and bagels. The library offered gift baskets as door prizes. Susan Drucker will talk more about this in her report, but I look forward to seeing more small business promotion in our city, by our city, and not just on Saturdays, so that businesses run by or that cater to our Orthodox community can also be included. We got a single bid on the new chairlift. We want to see more bids, so we'll be advertising for bids again. More on that later in the agenda. I attended meetings for the Sewer District's Suburban Council of Governments and the Board of Trustees for the Heights Hillcrest Communications Center, commonly referred to as Regional Dispatch. As our police chief, Chief Dustin Rogers, has previously conveyed, we are moving towards an online system for requesting permission to park overnight on our city streets. This will automate that process and take those calls out of the hands of Regional Dispatch, freeing them up to better serve more emergent calls. You may have seen an article on Cleveland.com today about Lakewood Police promoting texting 911. I would like to be clear that this service is not limited to Lakewood. Texting 911 from your cell phone has been tested throughout the county, and as of now, yes, you may text 911. The system went live in the last 2 weeks. Basically, 911 calls made from your mobile phone, whether by text or voice, will go to Cuyahoga Emergency Communication System, also known as CCOMS, where once they identify you as a University Heights caller or texter, you will then be transferred to the Heights Hillcrest Regional Dispatch. When it comes to texting versus calling, you are still encouraged to call if you can, but to text if you cannot. If you are someplace where it would be dangerous for you to be heard making that phone call, such as hiding in a closet during a home invasion or locked in the trunk of a car, then yes, you may text 911. Coming up these next couple of weeks between now and the next City Council meeting on December 17th, there will be a Safety Committee meeting on Wednesday, December 5th at 6 p.m. in the downstairs conference room. Councilman Rock, I'm sure, will talk about that more in his report. There will be a Building Committee meeting on Wednesday, December 6th at 7 p.m. here in Council Chambers to discuss rental property issues with the residents affected by them, and Councilman Wiseman, I'm sure, will discuss that more in his report. There will be a Governmental Affairs meeting on Monday, December 10th to discuss strengthening anti-smoking laws here in University Heights, and Councilwoman Weiss, I'm sure, will discuss that more in her report. On Wednesday, December 12th at 6:30 PM, I've called a Mayor's Citizen Committee on Neighborhood Dispute Resolution. This has been an interest of mine since the beginning of my term in office. I've asked attorney and University Heights resident Justin Seabury Gould to chair that committee. The purpose of the committee is to advise the mayor on how we can create and potentially administer a dispute resolution process where neighbors are having issues with each other. Rather than call the police or call your own lawyer or take matters into their own hands, the thought would be to call City Hall and try to schedule something where a neutral party can attempt to mediate the dispute. I asked for volunteers for this earlier in the year, and we're also promoting this on Facebook, and now I'm promoting it here. So that again is Wednesday, December 12th, 6:30 PM here in council chambers. And one final date I'd like to offer that you may put on your calendar is looking to next year, Wednesday, February 13th, 7 PM, I will deliver the State of the City address. That concludes my report. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the presentation by the fire department regarding the purchase of a new ladder truck. Chief Perko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Want me to get set up on a quick second?
Well, I suppose we could say something. Chief Perko, before we really get underway, we've got these new screens here in chambers, and I know you had quite a bit to do with that, so would you like to tell us a little bit about that first?
Sure. When council asked about providing a presentation for the meeting tonight about this ladder truck, I was wondering how it would be best to show you, whether use a PowerPoint with a screen projector, and risk blocking view of the audience and still allowing council obviously to see it. We kicked around some ideas with some of our IT gurus at the firehouse, and I believe one of them even talked with Patrick as well about some ideas he previously had. So we were able to capitalize on the project before Black Friday started, and pretty much got all the items you see here at almost 50% off cost. And I think it'll serve council well and all of its visitors for any presentations in the future.
Awesome.
Well, that's great. And I would like to also add that this is something that I know the council's wanted for some time. I know that this is something that every time we've had some kind of presentation, there's been a question as far as, you know, what kind of boards are we going to produce? Do we have to produce 2 sets? There have been other instances this year where it would have been nice to have had, but, you know, I've looked at this setup since you've set it up, and, you know, you plug in once, we've got a box full of adapters, it's going to show up on both screens, and this is now set up. This is now going to be a thing, right?
Right.
Excellent.
It'll reside here and we can use it. It should have all the adapters for any type of device, for any kind of presenter that comes.
Did this come out of your budget?
I don't believe so.
No, this is something council did budget for earlier in the year. It's just,
Okay.
we
Very good. I just
have
don't
finally
want-
made it happen.
Thank you very much. I just don't want the fire people's budget to be negatively impacted by something that will serve the city in totality.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Cameron. I assure you that there's a much bigger item he's about to discuss that will be in the fire department's budget.
I will give credit to one of our new lieutenants, Lieutenant Kalo. He's the one that kind of spearheaded this and worked with the finance director and decided what components we needed and everything like that.
Excellent.
Excellent. Well, kudos to Lieutenant Kalo.
All right. So the last council meeting prior to starting, we had a committee of the whole meeting where we had this exact PowerPoint presented to the committee. And after the council meeting that evening, it was suggested by some of the council members to bring it to council at this meeting and kind of go over some of the components in it, which addresses the current situation with our ladder truck that we have now. If we need to get a new ladder truck, when we need to get it, what it costs, and why we need it and why we need a particular style. So hopefully I'll cover all that in here. I don't know if you want to do questions as we go through it or wait till it's completed and ask questions after. I'll let you all decide.
Well, perhaps we can play that by ear. If a question relates to something that you're going to be getting to shortly, then I'm sure you can let us know that, and then we can belay that question.
So that's a picture of our current ladder truck. As you can see, it's almost 28 years old come the new year. It's served us very well in the community. It's provided us our needs with the deployment model that was in place back in 1992 when we purchased it. Basically, it's kind of a bare bones ladder truck. It's smaller in nature and lacks a little bit of everything. But it works for us, especially at that time, because we have an engine that complements it. So the difference between the fire engine and the fire ladder truck visually is the ladder on top. But throughout the presentation, I'll get into more of the specifics that are the main differences between them. And we'll also talk about staffing in the department and where it was both prior to 1992 and after, including today, and why some of the challenges that exist with operating out of a truck like this. This truck, also being 1990s technology, has that safety technology. So it has drum disc brakes, drum rather than disc, and no anti-lock feature, no airbags. It doesn't have lockout features to prevent the aerial ladder from hitting a building or the truck itself. It doesn't have the black box that you commonly hear about in airplanes that new fire apparatus are required to have. And it also doesn't have seatbelt indicators. New standards allow for trucks to not even be able to be put in drive until all occupants are seatbelted.
Really? Gosh.
So as I stated, this truck has served us well, and it was a great component to our department in the 90s, but it has some deficiencies moving forward, and I'll explain those as we go forward. A lot of people ask what we use the ladder truck for, and if it's ever been on any big fires. I didn't want to make this a PowerPoint of incidents that the truck has responded to, and I try to leave a couple of the sensitive ones in nature in our own community out of the slide. But I did want to provide some incidents that the truck did operate at through its career. The entire fire department operates on standards. And these national standards are from the National Fire Protection Association. These standards were developed in 1896 and they've expanded as time has gone on. The National Fire Safety Council forms a technical committee. These committees have insurance brokers, consumers, the AHJs, installers, manufacturers, UL testers, and subject matter experts to all contribute into coming up with a standard. And the standards have to do with everything that operates the fire service. So everything from fire protection systems, our occupational health and safety, our turnout gear that we wear, our breathing apparatus that we use, the fire hose that we operate with, how we do our training and how we do our continuing education, and then as well as vehicles and everything about them, how they're serviced, how long they should be in service. So the main point on the slide here to note is the last one, where it states that apparatus not built to NFPA standards or 25 years old should be retired from service. Our truck will be 28 years old next year, and it does not meet NFPA standards due to mechanical deficiencies at this time as well. So these standards are something that we take very serious in all aspects of the department, especially with our vehicles. This is a list of deficits that this truck had a few weeks ago. A couple of them have been rectified since the presentation was made. But the picture of this truck that you see there is from a neighboring community. And the exact same situation almost happened to our truck last year. We were having difficulty with it driving and suspension issues. And we had a hard time getting the parts because they don't make the parts anymore that are supposed to be on it. The particular suspension parts that were recommended to be on it made the truck too tall to fit into our station. The trucks carry more equipment now than they did in the 90s. The equipment weighs more. It needs a beefier suspension. And so it did not have the right type of parts on it to carry what we're carrying now. And due to that, and some of the other deficiencies you can see listed there, like the frame rails being corroded and rusted, contributed to our rear axle actually bending. And some of the bolts had actually rotted away and allowed for it to have that axle shimmy and was crooked in the apparatus itself. So fortunately, we were able to get it rectified and get a suspension system on it that works, that holds the equipment and still fits in the building, even though it's not up to the manufacturer's specifications. The first two items there, the pump and aerial ladder testing, what it's testing is a variety of components in that NFPA standard. So a third-party company that's approved to test per the standard comes out and conducts these different tests. We've replaced various parts on it to make it operational, because per NFPA, the truck is not allowed to be in service whatsoever if it does not pass these two tests. So we do have it operational, and it is on the road right now. We did not fix many of these components because we're hopeful we're going to replace it. And in the slides future in the PowerPoint, I'll explain how much money we've been putting into this truck and how it's exceeded its fair market value. The other thing to note about this truck, and with the list of deficiencies, is that when our fire engine, the only other fire apparatus we have, goes out of service, whether something's broke on it or it just gets its annual maintenance, like pump testing, ladder testing, oil changes, this 28-year-old truck with these deficiencies is the only fire piece of apparatus we have protecting our community. So here's a 3-year breakdown of some of the repairs that we had back in 2016, 17, and so far this year. For 2018, you can see a range. 10,000 is what we've spent so far. If we completed the list, which was a approximately 5 to 6 page list from the mechanics garage, we would exceed probably $25,000 to fix those things. If we wanted to get it up to the NFPA standard, we'd be looking at $40,000 in repair, but it still wouldn't meet the standard because of its age. You can see we considered a refurbishment. That's where they take the truck and take the cab completely off the frame, sand it down, paint it, and start from ground zero. It would provide us another 5 to 10 years, but it will not meet standard, and it will not have the same warranties as a new one. And it cost $500,000. So it was not recommended from the two companies that we had spec'd out for refurbishment that we actually did so. You can see that the fair market value is only between $5,000 and $10,000. So we're far exceeding the money we're putting into the truck for what it's even worth. It's basically going to be worth what we can get for it in scrap at this point. The national standards talk about a deployment model and how we should protect our communities and staff our apparatus with people. So I'm going to give you a history of our deployment model, and this is just a visual aid kind of leading into that. The deployment model references frontline apparatus and reserve. So frontline is equipment that we physically staff and roll out on emergencies, and reserve apparatus is those that are in a backup position. We don't staff them unless we jump staff them and take a frontline piece out of service. So an example, we have 2 ambulances. We just bought a brand new one. That's in the reserve status right now. If there's an EMS call, we take the frontline squad with 3 members, and they go on the EMS call, leaving 3 other members back at the station. Those 3 members can use either that engine, that ladder truck, or our reserve ambulance. We can put that in service if there's a concurrent EMS call. So we do a lot of jump staffing based on the manpower, which is what the next slide will show. So it should be noted too that the engine is also going to be 11 years old next year. So it's recommended by the standard that an engine stays in service for 15 years. So we really should be thinking about the replacement of that truck or putting it in reserve status and having a new frontline engine. But the model that we're going to be looking at with this new ladder truck may help us stretch the life out of that engine. This slide is just a picture of the new ambulance, currently in the reserve status, but it will move to the frontline status at the turn of the year. So this is the history of the deployment model I was talking about. And you can see in 1987, we had 1 engine, 1 ladder, and 1 rescue squad, just as you saw in the previous slide. The difference is there were 3 members dedicated to each one of those vehicles. And then we also had an engine and a rescue squad in reserve status. So if an alarm came in, whether it needed an engine, ladder, and an ambulance, or just one component or the other, the members assigned to that vehicle responded on that vehicle. As you can see, we transitioned through 97 and 07, where the ladder truck started to get its staffing reduced. In the current model, where we have 6 personnel on duty, we only have 2 members on the engine, 1 on the ladder, and 3 on the rescue squad. And we no longer have a pumping piece of apparatus in reserve. This is why we jump staff. And there's a slew of situations that I could explain on how that works. But the basic one is, like I said, about the EMS calls. If the ambulance goes out with the 3 members dedicated to it, it leaves those 3 members back to decide, are they going to take an engine on the next one, the ladder, or the backup reserve squad? Because we don't have the staffing that we did in 1987 to just staff all those vehicles. So part of purchasing this new ladder is the design of what the ladder is going to be. And I'll talk about it in a few moments. But it's taking a look at our deployment model and our staffing. And if our staffing is going to stay the way it is, it's looking at a redeployment so that we're not trying to basically do less with less. We're going to try to do more with less by reorganizing the way we operate. Now this is nothing new in our area. This next slide is the same history model of Cleveland Heights Fire Department. You can see in 1987, their staffing was also higher than it is today. You'll also notice that they had 2 ladder trucks in 1987, both of them staffed. Same in 1997. And in 2007, they only had 1 ladder truck, and it was short-staffed with 2 members. In 2017, it shows that the ladder truck is staffed with 3 members, but those members are now jump-staffed. So if they have 3 EMS calls happening at the same time in their community, those members on that ladder truck go on that 3rd ambulance call and leave the ladder truck unstaffed. Same thing in the Shaker Heights Fire Department. You can see the decrease in personnel from 87 to 2017, and you can see they too also had 2 ladder trucks in 1987, both fully staffed. 1997, they went down to 1 truck properly staffed, and in 07, 1 truck unstaffed. They staffed it via jump staffing. In 2017, it shows that they made a change, and you'll see there that it says Quint instead of ladder truck. The next slide will explain what a quint is. A quint is a combination of an engine and a ladder truck. It's a dual-purpose truck that has both capabilities built into one. So, going back to the Shaker Heights model, they actually reduced staffing by one that year in 2017, but staffed their vehicles more adequately because of the quint. So they no longer have an engine, an extra engine like in '07. They have two engines they're staffing and an unstaffed ladder. They now have a staffed engine and a staffed quint, which is an engine and a ladder. So they're making their resources more user-friendly to match their staffing model. And that's what we're looking to do here in our fire department. So this is the future model for our department. And it shows two different variations. One has a command car, one does not. You'll see in the Shaker model, they've had a command car all throughout the history of their department, as well as in Cleveland Heights. The command car comes into play from FEMA and the National Incident Management System. We run an incident command structure on any emergency incident, especially the fire ground. And the incident commander provides for control and accountability on the fire ground. The model on the right accounts for that command car with one member in it, which is our officer in charge of the city at that time, the rescue squad with 3 members, and 2 members on the quint, with the same staffing level of 6. What this allows us to do is operate with a jump staff model that is eliminating one piece of equipment. So now we'll have members on the quint responding daily and members on the squad responding daily. The only time they would jump staff is in the event of a building fire. And we will actually be able to put 5 members on this quint, bring the ambulance with 1 member, and keep 1 member in our command car. And I'll show you how that looks in the future here. But it allows for us to meet the national standards. I'll show later what the standards are as far as how many people we should have respond to an incident, on how many vehicles, and in what amount of time. We don't meet it fully at this point in time with our current deployment model, but we would meet it with either of these 2 models. So again, a quint is just a word that means engine and ladder. That's both capabilities. So here's some of the differences of a quint versus our current ladder truck. It has much more reach. The current one has a 75-foot aerial ladder, which is the ladder on the top of the truck, versus a 100-footer. It has a platform or bucket on the end of the ladder for the firefighters to work in, which provides them more safety in a work area rather than being on the end of just a regular ladder as that bigger truck is in the picture. It has more ground ladders. Having a ladder truck is definitely not about just having the aerial ladder on top. It's much more than that. Much of what it has to do is the amount of equipment it can carry. Ladder trucks are much larger than engines typically, and they have much more capacity because they don't carry the water that a fire engine does. So it allows them to carry more ground ladders. The ground ladders are used for us to rescue victims, ventilate windows or roofs on buildings to help us extinguish the fire. A quint will allow us to carry much more water than a traditional ladder truck, including a current ladder truck, which is how it gets its rating to be also considered as a fire engine. Because of that, it'll carry more hose, and then the pumping capabilities actually double what our current engine are today. The reason that I said our ladder truck in the very first slide doesn't really meet 2017 standards and our deployment model was because when we were properly staffed to outfit an engine and a ladder and we brought both of them to the scene with the people that use it, it got all of our equipment there. if we don't have the people, or we don't have one of these trucks, or one of them's out of service due to mechanical issues, we're not getting the proper equipment that we need. Typically, a fire engine carries the water and the hose on the truck. It carries appliances like nozzles and adapters, things to operate in high-rise buildings, residential buildings, to extinguish the fire. It also carries air bottles that we wear for breathing, and it carries a very minimal amount of ground ladders. The standards that NFPA recommends is that it carries a 24-foot extension ladder, a 14-foot roof ladder, and a 10-foot ladder that we call an attic ladder that we use inside the home. So that 3-story building in this photo here, none of the ladders on the engine would be able to reach that top floor or the roof. On the contrary, a ladder truck, it does provide the aerial ladder on top, but it also provides a variety of different ground ladders that are portable and mobile. They can range in sizes from 40 foot, 35 foot, 24 foot, 16, 28, 24, 14, and 10. It also carries all the vehicle extrication tools. They cut people out of cars if they're trapped, or stabilize them if they're flipped over. A lot of these tools are heavy and take up a lot of space that the engine just doesn't have room to store. It carries wood to stabilize, fans, generators, hand tools. It's basically our toolbox on wheels. The tower ladder, or Quint, also gives us more capabilities than our current ladder or not having a ladder at all. You can see these two slides show two buildings that are typical to University Heights. A 2.5, and this one in particular is a 3-story residential home, or a McDonald's. And there's still advantages to having an aerial ladder. It's not just always about a high-rise building that you would need an aerial ladder for. These offer an advantage point for the fire department to make an attack on extinguishing a fire. So in that top photo in the residential home, those two ladder trucks on each side of the building, should there be a collapse of that roof structure, they will not be in harm's way. You know, even if we were taking what we would call a defensive operation, where we're not putting people inside due to a high volume of fire or an unsafe structure, they would be down on the ground trying to squirt water into the windows with a hose line, putting themselves at a disadvantage point and in the collapse zone.
Yeah, I bet.
So it definitely provides a lot more capabilities. Same thing with the 1-story McDonald's there. We're able to reach different vantage points. What that photo is showing is it's in it, that brick wall on the exterior is not a true brick wall. It's what we call curtain wall. And if there's fire in between the actual structural frame of the house or the building and that wall, they're able to go past that wall with that ladder and squirt water from the back side of it. And it's without committing firefighters to the roof of that building. We would call that lightweight construction, which is very dangerous to operate actually physically on the roof, especially when it's under a fire load. So this provides safety for a building like that. The whole entire Heights area has a mixed construction. We have old legacy construction with grandfather buildings that aren't up to current code. A lot of our garden style apartment buildings don't have monitored fire alarm systems, don't have sprinklers, and don't have standpipes for us to hook up to and operate. So it presents some challenges to us to extinguish fires in this type of buildings. If you remember, in Warrensville Heights last year, they had a fire break out due to a police matter, and the fire ran the whole roof structure of this horseshoe-shaped garden apartment. So they had to use aerial ladders to cut off the fire and prevent firefighters from being in the dangerous zones like the collapse zone. Another use for this in the application of the top photo. Recently, in the Heights area, there was an arson fire. And that fire resulted in the interior stairwell being completely burned away. And they had a victim on the second floor. So the firefighters needed to get in access into the second floor, not only to extinguish the fire, but to try to rescue the victim. And without having the interior stairwell, they're forced to do that through ladders. And they can do it through ground ladders, but it's much more difficult to drag a fire hose up a ground ladder than it is to spray it through a window with an aerial ladder. This is a little bit more complex incident, the photo shown in the last two. But all it does is show you all the complications that we'd be up against in the event of a high-rise fire. So these are very useful just in the residential setting or in a one-story commercial. But in a high-rise situation, we have a much higher life hazard and there's more risk. We're going to need more firefighters and more trucks. So it's critical to get the right amount of ladder trucks per the NFPA standard to the scene, not only for extinguishment, but for rescue operations. By having the quint and having the tower ladder with the bucket, provides an enclosed area for the firefighters and for the victims that may be coming out windows so that we can get them down safely, as opposed to them climbing down a 100-foot ladder. Each victim that we take down a ladder that we have to coach and climb down with them is another victim we can't get to. With a tower ladder that has a bucket on it, we also can have breathing air up there for firefighters or to share with victims in the event of a fire like this. It also has anchor points in it so that the firefighters can be strapped into the bucket. So should something happen where the bucket gets ajar, they won't be ejected from it. All the equipment that we carry on that ladder truck that has to make it into the house or onto the roof of these buildings, because in a fire like this, we need to cut large holes in the roof to allow it to ventilate. We have to carry that all up a traditional ladder. So saws, our air packs, hand tools and rope bags, and other ladders, portable ladders. With the tower ladder with a bucket on the end, we're able to get those up to the fire more safely. So back to the NFPA standard. This particular one, 1710, has to do with the deployment model and how we get our people to the incidents. And what it really is recommending there on the top right where it says engine and truck is that 4 people respond on these apparatus at a time. And then it says if there's a high volume, a geographic restriction, or a target hazard, it actually recommends either 5 or 6 members responding on these vehicles. So this is part of why we're looking at the reorganization of our deployment. And rather than having a couple members on each truck or jump staffing multiple trucks, we want to allocate most of our members to this one new truck so that we can be properly staffed and meet these standards. It's important that we meet these and we meet them in the correct times because time is of the essence. A fire, given the right setting, can quadruple in size in just a matter of seconds. You can have a trash can on fire in a kitchen in a matter of a minute or two, have the whole kitchen on fire. And a few more minutes, if it goes unchecked, you can have multiple rooms on fire. And by the time we get there, it could be the whole first floor. So timing is really critical. And having our members respond together is kind of the key component. If we only have a couple people responding on each truck or multiple trucks, including mutual aid trucks, then we're behind the ball because we don't have our team in place on the truck with the equipment ready to go right out of the gate. In the event a fire happens in our community, we want to make sure that we get it extinguished quickly. That's what this is all about. And as it says there in the slide, a fire will hurt the tax base. It hurts the business. We're a small community. We can't afford to lose businesses or have businesses be down. If they're down, that means they can't pay their taxes, which causes us problems too. And if the business burns completely to the ground, we risk them considering moving out of the city or relocating. So we want to make sure that in the event of a fire breaking out, that we at least mitigate it quickly and get it extinguished while it's small. far as the high volume, geographic restriction, and target hazards, we actually have those spelled out in our dispatch center. We have automatic aid agreements with our neighbors that bring in additional resources automatically for these hazards. So things like the Huntington Green Apartments, the John Carroll campus, and some of our other mid-rise or large buildings like University Square. That's where we need the additional staffing, and we actually bring in additional resources automatically to meet the standards. This is a response analysis of the ladder truck and the engine. The ladder truck is the red color and the engine is the green. It starts in 2010 and goes to the current year, 2018. You can see in the beginning they were kind of balanced and then they get skewed. In 2014 through 17, under the previous administration, we removed the ladder truck from our response cars in an effort to, I guess, try to see if we could operate without the ladder truck. So you can see that that increased the amount of use we were putting on the engine. So there was no more balance between the two. And this created a lot of operational deficiencies for us and some safety issues. And an example of that was on motor vehicle accidents, we would bring the ladder truck not only for the equipment on it to cut a person out of a car if they were trapped or stabilize it if it was flipped over, but also to block the road. And we would block the road for the protection of all the first responders, both fire and police, and for the residents. You know, motor vehicle accidents are chaotic, and especially at rush hour. Sometimes family members come to the scene of those involved, and they want to run right out into the street to see if they're okay. And there's a lot going on. And then in this day and age, you have everybody else passing by, not paying attention, sometimes on their phone, texting and driving. And it's important that the fire and the police departments work together to create a safe zone for the incident. Literally the week that we removed our ladder truck from responding to these motor vehicle accidents last year, there was a Cleveland police officer that was killed in the line of duty, Officer Fahey. And that was due to a van that hit a Rocky River ladder truck protecting the scene of a motor vehicle accident. And it spiraled a chain of events and other motor vehicle accidents that resulted in the death of not only this passenger vehicle driver, but a Cleveland police officer.
Oh, man.
So you can see in 2018, even though the truck has been out of service much of the year due to mechanical issues, we've been responding it much more frequently. A lot of this coincides with our automatic aid agreements. And a lot of people ask if we even need a ladder truck in the city because we do have automatic aid and mutual aid. But the reality is, as you can see from the history of the deployment models in all the cities, everyone has cut staffing and cut resources, including ladder trucks. So we're all heavily relying on each other. I made University Heights smaller in here on purpose because we're currently the weak link in the chain of our automatic aid agreements. And that's because of the age of our ladder truck. It's so frequently out of service. We've only had it in service 42% of the year this year. Our automatic aid agreements bring us fire engines, and we give a ladder truck out to those other communities. So for almost half the year, we haven't been able to live up to our end of the deal and provide that ladder truck to our neighboring communities while they still bring in the fire engine to us. Now they're aware that we're looking at the consideration of this truck, and they're hopeful that we can continue to be able to respond to their calls, especially for their target hazards, as I explained earlier. We also have mutual aid agreements. This is a county mutual aid box alarm system, and this represents the Heights Hillcrest region. And for almost all of these 14 cities you see listed here, it's our ladder truck that is the responding vehicle that goes to these cities. Much of that is because of the proximity of our station to theirs, and the small geographical size of our city. It doesn't take us a long time to get out of our city to get into the neighboring communities. Ladder trucks, when they're used, are limited to the length of their ladder. So they need to have the best position at the emergency incident, which is close to the structure that's involved. So they need the ladder trucks to get there quickly. Otherwise, all the fire engines respond, we block the street, we lay fire hoses, connect them to fire hydrants, and then the ladder trucks can't get into where they need to be. So that's why we are the ladder truck mainly for these 14 cities. This is a GIS map, which is Geographic Information System. The 5 red dots in the pink area represents the fire departments in this area. Our department, Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, South Euclid, and Beechwood, particularly the ones that have ladder trucks in them. The blue area shows the NFPA standard of having a ladder truck arrive within the 4-minute window. So you can see if we eliminated the ladder truck out of the blue area around University Heights, which is the central red dot there, none of the other ladder trucks would be able to respond in and meet the standard if we relied solely on them. You know, we rely on our partners a lot, and they do help out, and it does make things work. But it does come with some operational hazards and deficiencies. So a couple weeks ago, we had a residential fire in our city, and our ladder truck was out of service because of the mechanical issues. So we rely on mutual aid to get a ladder truck from Cleveland Heights in this particular area of the city. Cleveland Heights' ladder truck, since it's jump staffed, was unstaffed because those members were on an ambulance call, so it was unavailable. Shaker Heights was unavailable because they were on another call with their jump staff personnel. Our dispatch center then reached out to the Beechwood Fire Department. They were unavailable because they were out on EMS calls and could not bring the ladder truck. Same situation in Warrensville Heights, same situation in Bedford Heights. We finally got a ladder truck from the Highland Heights Fire Department, which was the same time that the Cleveland Heights ambulance crew freed up, drove from the hospital to their fire station, got their ladder truck, and drove it to our scene. The problem with this is, yes, we did get a ladder truck, but it took almost 18 minutes for one to get there. This fire was a second floor fire of a 3-story home. There was family members at home at the time of the fire, and the mother of the children was upstairs in her bedroom on the 3rd story of the home. The children on the 1st floor noticed the fire on the 2nd floor and notified the mother to get out of the house. When she came down the stairs from the 3rd story, she saw fire in the bedroom right in front of the stairwell she was trying to exit. So she went back up, hoping to get rescued from the fire department. Fortunately for her and for us, she decided that she didn't want to stay in the smoky environment that was starting to take place on that 3rd floor. And she became very brave and ran past the fire and was able to do so without injury and make it out through the 2nd floor down to the 1st floor out the main door. If she had been trapped just a few more seconds or minutes after that, and we would need to get her out, we rely on those ground ladders on our ladder truck to reach those 3rd floor windows. Our fire engine only has that 24-foot ladder that meets the standard, that does not reach some of those 3rd floor areas. So it's critical that we have these ladder trucks with the right equipment that are up to date, mechanically sound, with the people in place, so that when we do have these unfortunate events, we're properly prepared. So these are a list of some of the efficiencies that our department collaborates with some of our local departments. We do use automatic aid, and we do use mutual aid. That's something that we do to prevent having even more vehicles and duplicate efforts. It's how we get away with operating with the staffing that we do have and keep the community safe by doing so. So we can see that we have the Regional Fire Dispatch Center, we have regional tech rescue teams, the agreements I spoke about. We apply for cooperative grants together, we do regional disaster planning together, and we're now looking in the future at doing our apparatus maintenance together, fire investigations together with a regional team, and possibly doing our entrance exam testing together, like some of the Hillcrest communities are currently doing. So we're constantly looking for ways to try to be more efficient and save our communities more money. Another big point of why we need to have the proper vehicles and proper protection is ISO, the Insurance Services Office. ISO determines the public protection classification for our community. It basically determines the availability and the price of insurance to our residents and to our business holders. So a major component that they look at is fire suppression and the equipment that we use to do it, along with fire prevention and investigation. So we're already targeting these national standards and these ISO ratings. We're getting our Fire Prevention Bureau open at the turn of the year so we can work on prevention and investigation. And now we want to target, moving into 19, how we're going to provide fire suppression more adequately and meet these ISO ratings. These public protection classifications look at 4 different areas. One is the deployment capabilities, which is the equipment we're bringing to the scenes. So things like a quint and what we're carrying on the quint. It looks at water, how much water it's carrying, the pumping capabilities. It looks at distance, how far we are from our target hazards in our community and how fast we can get our members to those hazards. And then it looks at communications, which we should have high rating due to our regional dispatch center. But you can see on the right side where it says credit for ladder service, it states that if you have 5 buildings of 3 or more stories, you need a ladder truck. Otherwise, you do not get the points in the rating, which will reduce your rating, which will increase the insurance costs. So we have almost 20 buildings in our own city that are 3 or more stories, and we have some residential homes that are 3 stories. So we far exceed the credit for ladder service need. You can also see the disclaimer near the bottom about quints, where they'll give full credit for a fire engine or a ladder truck by having a quint. Fires are down statistically across the nation, but they are higher in the residential setting now more than they've ever been. And being that it's in the residential setting versus commercial, that means fire deaths are also at a record high. With that comes property loss. And you can see an almost 10-year look back there. Property loss in the millions is relatively the same throughout. So having insurance is important, and having our business holders and our residents able to get good rates is also important. So the graph there, the numbers on the bottom, which range from 2 to 10 if you can't see, is that public protection classification rating. And as your rating goes up, as in number 10, that's worse. And then indicated by the bar graphs, so do your insurance premiums. So the goal is to lower our rating, which is better, and then receive better insurance ratings. This is a financial analysis of the current fleet in our department. So we have 2 rescue squads, 1 frontline, 1 reserve. It costs approximately $170,000, and we can get 10 years of useful life out of them. That comes to about $17,000 a year per its useful life each year, 10 years. The fire engine is about $300,000. We can get 15 years of useful life out of it. Break that down, that's $20,000 a year for that fire engine. This proposed ladder truck has a sticker shocking price of 1.3 million, but it'll last us for over 20 years. Breaking that price down over its lifespan is $66,000 a year. Our total replacement cost of the 2.3 mil over the 20 years, 20 being the longest because of the ladder truck, it only cost us $119,000 a year to plan for our fleet replacement. So if we were to budget a capital line of $120,000 a year, every single year, we would have the money to replace all 4 of those vehicles at their service lifetime without ever having to consider a one-time lump sum of $1.3 million. And then it shows revenue. That fire department bills for its EMS calls. So the last 3 years of billing, we've billed almost $500,000 each year, and we collect on average half of that. If we would take half of what we collect in annual billing and put it towards a fleet replacement program, that too would also pay for these vehicles when they're needed, rather than the sticker shock of the 1.3 mil.
Are we doing questions?
Well, yes, although depending on what your question is, if it's something he's going to address, we may ask that you just wait till he gets there. But what's your question?
I was wondering, I don't understand the collection part of it. Where do we get the money?
From insurance mostly?
Insurance, okay.
Yes.
Well, what about, the 120,000, that you're saying must be budgeted every year over the 20 years? Does that include, is the estimation of the cost include repairs?
No, not repairs, just purchasing.
Okay.
I think repairs would be much more minimal for a truck that was in its useful life too. Part of the reason that we have these exceeding costs for just repairs are because the truck's 28 years old. This is just a quick comparison with the other 2 departments in the city that provide services to our community. And I don't even know everything, honestly, that the service department has, but salt trucks, plow trucks, garbage buggies, leaf trucks and sewer trucks. I have no idea what those costs or what their service lives are. Just in some rough research online and not confirming with Mr. Picorni, I looked at a garbage truck having a useful life of 10 years, and that cost of one being approximately $250,000 each. And if you were to take 4 of those at that cost for 10 years, you'd be looking at about $100,000 a year just to replace the garbage trucks. Or an example of the police with just patrol cars, if they had a dozen of them on the road with a service life of 5 years each, at the cost of $86,000 fully outfitted for each car, you're looking at $208,000 a year just to plan for the replacement of those cars. So I know the ladder truck is an insanely high amount of money, but it's only one ladder truck. We only have 4 frontline vehicles total, and we're really looking at streamlining the equipment with having this quint, because it's going to allow us to put this quint up front as a frontline engine and ladder, and then we're going to take that engine and put it into reserve status. So it's going to extend the life of our current engine, less wear and tear, less maintenance, and hopefully less cost overall. Safety considerations. Basically everything on the left, what it says is that using ground ladders, portable ladders, use 3 or more firefighters to deploy. And though they're mobile in nature, they're not very quick to remote. Getting a victim out of a window is extremely difficult. It's near impossible if they're unconscious. And to try to do it on a ground ladder is also almost impossible. Typically we take 2 ground ladders and put them side by side. There's a lot of safety hazards. on the fire ground at all, but let alone trying to use a portable ground ladder. So having this tower ladder with the bucket capability allows us to be much more safer, not just for us, but for the victims we're trying to remove. It's also much more mobile. The tower ladder can be controlled either from the ground level at the truck or from up in the bucket where the guys are. And they can move from different points at the structure that they're operating in. It's also hard to take a hose line up a portable ladder and into a house. You know, a gallon of water weighs over 8 pounds, and some of the hoses that we're using flow 180 gallons a minute. So we have a lot of water, a lot of weight, and we're trying to reduce firefighter injuries, keep our guys safe, along with keeping the community safe. The whole Heights area has a lot of different grade changes at houses, where the yards are sloping, and it's hard to get a ladder to stay balanced, so those present some challenges for us. What that slide there is a video that before the meeting started I was trying to get to play, and in an effort to not mess up the presentation, I'm just not going to play it. But it's a slide of a YouTube video of a firefighter rescuing a victim. And as they come out of the window together, the ladder shifts, and he missed the rung, and both the firefighter and the victim fall from the second-story window down to the ground. So those are some of the things that could be potentially eliminated with the use of this ladder truck or quint that we're looking to purchase. This is the slide you've all been waiting for. So I emailed the PowerPoint to you. Hopefully you guys got it. But the financials in it changed throughout the week. Finance director was working to make sure that the rates were still accurate. This is the one that you just mailed out.
Yes, this is the one he just emailed out maybe an hour before the council meeting because KeyBank also updated their numbers, but yes.
Very good. So he reached out to a variety of banks. It might be hard to read. So Huntington, Key, Republic First National, and then Leasing 2, which is a company from one of the manufacturers we're looking at buying an apparatus from. He also reached out to Dollar Bank, UBS, and Citizens, but those three did not submit a bid. So they provided various terms, various rates for semi-annual and annual payment plans. And I believe he was looking at Huntington and Key originally. And then after we met the last time and we wanted to see if what they proposed to us would still be good because they only had a 30-day proposal, I believe. Huntington came back and said yes, they would extend their quote. Key came back and said yes. Republic First National did not respond. But when Leasing 2 replied back to us, they also resubmitted a quote that had lower rates. So in the third column, you'll see the Leasing 2, and that's their original rates. And then in the fifth column, it's the revised rates. So after speaking and meeting with the finance director, as noted at the bottom of the paper, he's now recommending going with Leasing 2 due to the lower rates and using the 10-year term because the annual payment is something that he feels comfortable recommending the council moving forward with analyzing the budget and the revenue coming in. So that's that green box on the screen. It's a 10-year term with an interest rate of 3.65% and an annual payment of $158,755.85. This next slide talks about inflation. Generally speaking, on these ladder trucks, it's a 5% inflation rate each year. And especially moving forward into next year, with the tariffs and tax rates, steel costs on the rise, We're looking at approximately a $65,000 increase if we wait into the new year. We've talked with this leasing to banking company and with the manufacturer of the apparatus. If we were to sign an agreement this month, it takes approximately 12 months for them to build this vehicle. We would receive it towards the end of next year, and then they would defer the first payment until 2020. So no matter what term, 3, 5, 10 years we went with, the first payment wouldn't be until 2020. So it would have nothing to do with the 2019 budget. Just about done here. So aside from inflation, why do this now? And the truck being 28 years old. But it has to do with what I stated throughout, the national standards. The national standards also recommend how we use our protective gear that we wear, and when it should be replaced, and how it should be replaced, and who should repair it. Back in 2011, we had a firefighter, as shown there, firefighter Paul Nees, that was getting ready to retire. And his turnout gear had reached the time and the standard that was due to be replaced. And because he was due to retire, that particular administration decided to just forego replacing his gear so that they could get some more useful life out of the gear that he had, which did not meet the standard. And we did buy new gear for some of the younger members to meet the standard. There was a tragic fire on Milton Road that had 5 victims trapped on the 2nd floor. Firefighter Nees led our crew in on the 1st floor where they experienced a rapid fire event called flashover, which is basically an explosion of fire where the entire 1st floor was fully engulfed. And Firefighter Nees, as you can see there from the news story, had burns over 25% of his body. He was in the burn unit for a couple months. All kinds of emotional family issues. It was a very career-changing fire, not just for him, but for our department. And the other members that he was with inside the house when this event happened, they had also sustained very minor burns, but their new gear that was up to standards, they were treated and released at the hospital. They never made it up to the burn unit or nothing critical in nature. Whether it's a coincidence or not, we'll never know, but his gear that was not up to standards definitely caused him some challenges. So we want to make sure that our department is continuing to operate to the standard, including with our ladder truck. So to summarize, the value we get out of purchasing this truck that costs so much money is that it allows us to meet our mission of protecting life and property for the next 20 years, probably 25 years. You know, that truck was built that we have now in the 1990s, and we're having some difficulties with housing equipment on it and having it keep up with the times, if you will. So another reason that this truck costs what it does is because we're trying to forecast what are the needs of the department going to be 20 years from now. And we're trying to make sure that when we build it, we're going to be accommodating as much of those needs as we can think of. There's a cost avoidance of having 2 frontline fire apparatus. We'll only have 1 now that functions as both the engine and the ladder, putting that engine in the reserve status. We'll have reduced downtime. Like I said, this truck's only been on the road 42% of the year this year. And then when the fire engine does go out for maintenance, it's the only vehicle protecting our community. And then it also puts us in position for more collaborative efforts in the future by being a good resource for our neighbors like they are for us. Any questions now?
Well, before we yield to questions, I have here a report from Mr. Goff. I think maybe it would be a good idea for me to share it at this point. For everyone's benefit who may not be aware, James Goff is our finance director. He couldn't be here this evening. He broke his foot and he had surgery on his foot on Friday. He is under doctor's orders not to put any weight on that foot, which makes it very difficult for him to get into his car. But even if he got into his car with assistance, it would be impossible for him to get all the way up here to these chambers. So I have reports from him on various items this evening. One of these things is this fire truck, and I will read this now. The Finance Department recommends approving the requested 2019 Sutphen heavy-duty 100-foot mid-mount aerial ladder for the fire department so that the purchase and financing documents can be executed for the end of 2018 in order to avoid cost increases anticipated after year end. The Finance Department recommends accepting the revised financing proposal from Leasing 2 for a 10-year term with annual payments. The first payment of $158,755.85 would be due to Leasing 2 on January 2020. Leasing 2 would make a payment of $1,306,423 to Sutphen upon entry into the contracts with delivery of the 2019 Sutphen heavy-duty 100-foot mid-mount aerial ladder expected in December 2019. The payment by Leasing 2 to Sutphen includes the premium for a performance bond by Sutphen to ensure the delivery of the 2019 Sutphen heavy-duty 100-foot mid-mount aerial ladder. And I do have copies of this to give to all members of council, so I will pass this out now. Thanks. So, are there any questions for Chief Perk? Mr. Rock.
Mine's more of a comment, not a question.
Very good.
And thank you, Chief, for the presentation again. I think every time we meet to discuss this, I've learned something new. And it was just an incredible presentation, it really was. And I have to say kudos to the mayor for selecting you as chief, because the knowledge that you have and the leadership that you convey, he made the right choice, really. So I just wanted to say that. This is nothing new. We've been talking about this for a number of years, having a ladder truck in 19 that would be built in the year 19, so it's serviceable in year 20. So this is nothing new. We've actually met as a safety committee multiple times throughout the year to discuss this. And Chief Perko and his team met with the reps. And you forgot to mention that, so I just want to make sure that's mentioned a couple times throughout the year to actually look at these vehicles, tested them out, make sure they actually fit in our garage. So a lot of thought went into it from your department. I believe when seconds count, I want to ensure that our department has the best training and the best equipment possible. And your fire department reported to my home a few years ago when we had an incident in the wall, and they were there within a few minutes. And when anxiety was high and I was very nervous, I was very thankful that you guys were able to remedy the situation very quickly and keep us calm. So I want to ensure that the residents moving forward continue to have the best equipment. This is the top of the line. This will be the best piece of equipment I think we'll have in the area. When you talk about mutual aid, and you show pictures of other communities and their vehicles, their fleet, this is going to be the best piece of equipment. I am so glad we're going to have that housed in University Heights. So I don't have any questions for you because we've discussed it throughout the year in committee. So I do recommend we move forward with the Quinn. I think it's going to be tremendous for our department to have the capability of the pumper and the ladder combined. I was very glad that you found the leasing option a year ago and informed us about it, because we weren't ready for that. And I like your idea of putting aside money every year for those capital purchases in the future, so we're not that sticker shock. We don't have to make any payments in 19. Let's start now. You know what I mean? So I like that, and I think going forward for all of our capital, we really need to make sure we have a fund set aside that we're putting the money into it so that it's there and ready to go when we have to launch that vehicle.
Thank you, Councilman Rock. Does anybody else have any questions or comments that they wish to make at this time for Chief Perko? Well, okay, Chief Perko.
So I can expand on some of the work the committee did. I guess now would be a good time. So yeah, we have met with the safety committee multiple times throughout the year. And in April, we started really taking a hard look at the fire department's committee to see which one of these vehicles would meet our needs. One of the challenges, like I was indicating about the suspension of our current truck, is the size of our station. Many of the modern fire apparatus would have difficulty fitting into our station or could not fit at all. Fire trucks are kind of like passenger vehicles in the sense that, you know, there's maybe a dozen different manufacturers out there, and then another dozen to each one of those of different models you can get. And then you can customize them accordingly. So we really had to take a hard look and see which manufacturer was going to offer a product that would just fit in our station and still meet our needs. That was kind of where we started. So we went to Indianapolis in April to a national fire conference where they have everything fire department you can think of. And that includes ladder trucks. So every single manufacturer is there, and they have multiple models of all their different fire vehicles and ladder trucks. So we were able to go there and actually look at them and see some of them operate and get some of the specifications of them. So we were able to bring back then to our committee, which was made up of 7 of our guys of various ranks and levels of seniority, to start putting together a plan and a vision for this truck and who the manufacturers were going to be that we could even consider. And pretty quickly, we narrowed it down to 2 that were going to be able to offer us a product that would serve our community and actually be able to fit in the station. The height of the doors mainly, and then the length of the bay really restricted us on other manufacturers. As we moved forward in the process, it turned out that the truck we decided to recommend here is actually the truck we probably would be recommending if we had the biggest station in the county. So it just happens to work out that through our research, this one definitely fits our needs the best. And it has nothing to do with it fitting in the station other than it's a fortunate coincidence. So this company is local. It's based out of Ohio. The sales rep that we're working with was his great-grandfathers. They started around the early 1900s. And they started as a ladder truck company, actually. Many manufacturers out there started as a fire engine company, and they slowly expand into the ladder world, because that's a whole new engineering feat. And this company was designed specifically for ladder trucks, and they went the other way and slowly started doing fire engines. So I'm pretty excited about recommending them in particular because they're local. It makes things easier as far as maintenance goes, and it just seems like it has a right fit for us. We've made multiple trips down to Columbus, working with them and looking at all the varieties and specifications. I know I sent Ms. Thomas the proposal, and I think it was like 200 pages. That's probably why she left it out of your packet. She gave you the first page and the last page. But that 200 pages, it's every little gauge, lever, size of the compartment, size of the plumbing on the truck, you name it. The committee's gone through it. It's taken most of the year to get it down to where it's at now.
Mayor.
Mrs. Pardee.
Chief, thank you for such a detailed and comprehensive presentation. And I want you to know that the clerk did load the whole thing. We have the whole 100-page or so manual. I actually have a question about the ordinance. We would have to amend it because of the dollar amount. But this is a question for the law director. Do we cite the amount that is financed or the total financed amount when we cite this? For example, are we saying $1,306,423 or $1,587,558? Because that's the total amount we'll be paying over time.
Correct, and I would prefer that you, since we're authorizing the purchase, that you have the total amount that will be authorized as an expenditure.
So the 10-year with interest payments. Then I'm going to make the motion to approve.
Well, we haven't actually gotten to that agenda item yet, but, I mean, I don't want to put form over substance. We're on item A with regard to the presentation.
I'm ready to approve it.
You know, although I want to make sure everybody's had, especially with the significance of this purchase, which I want to be clear, I fully support. I want to make sure that everybody who wants to speak or has a question has an opportunity to do that before we make that motion.
And of course, you can speak when the motion is made.
Well, we can do that
So
too, but we
that's-
are still on item A. So if there are questions for Chief Perko with regard to the presentation or comments, and you know, I don't want to jump on anyone here, but as long as I am already speaking, I will keep the floor for a moment and just say, Chief, that was a brilliant presentation. And I know you've been working on this all year, and I know how you and the committee have been diligent about visiting and seeing the different trucks that we had narrowed this down to. This particular, the Sutphen, it was here for us to take a look at. We put it in the garage to make sure it fit. It's a tight fit, but it does fit. I got to sit in the engine. I got to go up in the ladder. I got to see downtown Cleveland from our own parking lot. I did wear the harness. It was an experience, and you know, it's. Side note, you know, it was everything for me to just hold on and be up there. I can't imagine also having to actually work and save lives and put out fires from up there, but that's why you do what you do and I don't. So, but that all said, you know, this city has had a history of delaying capital expenses. And it has culminated in needing to make up for some lost time. I mean, a ladder truck should never be allowed to be 28 years old and still be a frontline vehicle in any city, much less ours. And that's not your fault. I mean, I'm not saying that as any kind of criticism to you, Chief Perko. I mean, I'm saying that as a criticism of us as a city, that we have allowed ourselves to get to this point. That said, this is something I believe that this community absolutely needs, not just University Heights, but the greater community, just as the greater community also offers us aid with respect to mutual aid and in fires and situations like you mentioned, the one on Tullamore. We are very fortunate that things went as they did, and you were candid about it, and you were appropriately dispassionate about it, but I will be a little more passionate about it. We are so lucky that we did not see tragedy that day as we might have, given the availability of other apparatuses in other cities, given a third story that we could not reach, and the bravery of the occupant, the woman who was on the third floor, to find it, to run past the flames, down the steps and out. If she had not found it in herself to do that, I don't know, and I would hate to think what might have happened. And this is because our ladder truck was out of commission, as it's frequently been out of commission, because it is old, and because we have to put so much into it just to keep it running half the time. And because we've waited this long, even if when we purchase, even if we approve this tonight, like I hope we do, we've been on borrowed time, and we will continue to be on borrowed time in 2019 and until 2020 when we do get this truck. And I hope that we do not, as a city, come to regret the delay that's occurred to date for not making an investment years ago. But here we are today to rectify that and to do something that will be very much in the interest and in the for the safety and the welfare of the citizens of this community, And I fully support this, and I encourage the council. I don't think you're going to need much encouragement from me after they've heard what you've had to say. But I encourage the council to approve this. Thank you. Okay. If there is there anything further at this juncture, or should we move to item B?
Item B.
Let's move to item B. Motion authorizing the, should we amend item B before we read it, Luke?
As long as the motion includes the dollar amount, you don't need to amend.
Okay, well, I'm going to read the amount that's off of the proposed to the total payments as you suggested should be in the
Right,
motion. So,
correct.
so motion authorizing the mayor to purchase a new 2019 Sutphen heavy-duty 100-foot mid-mount aerial ladder, SPH 100, complete and delivered for the total sum of $1,587,558.50. Now, I know Chief Perko, you've already spoken on this. We're now on this item. Is there a motion or any discussion?
Mayor, I'll make the motion to approve the purchase for the purchase of the new 2019 Sutphen heavy-duty 100-foot mid-mount aerial ladder, complete and delivered for the total sum of the $1,587,558.50.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Rock, second by Mrs. Pardee. Is there any discussion on this motion? Okay. If there is no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you, council. Thank you, Chief Perko.
Thank you.
Great job. Looking forward to the future.
Okay, we
Do
have
we have a
a,
color picked?
we have a, we have a, it appears a motion for a brief recess by Mrs. Cameron.
Okay.
5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, motion for 5-minute recess by
good.
Mrs. Cameron. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Erdl. Is there any opposition or any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, we are recessed for 5 minutes. It's now 8:41. Let's try to be back at 8:46 or so. Thank you.
Your glasses are very nice.
So we are reconvening the city council back to order. The next item on the agenda is item C, which is resolution 2018-73. Excuse me? Oh,
Next time.
oh, do we need a motion to go? Okay.
Yeah, might as well.
All right, all right. Is there a motion to return to, I'm sorry, how do we put that?
Motion to resume
Motion to
regular session.
resume the meeting, the regular council session. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Weiss, second by Mr. Wiseman. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Very good, we are back. Item C is Resolution 2018-73, accepting 2 iPad tablets from the Ohio Department of Public Safety, Division of EMS, and the Ohio Highway Patrol, Ohio Traffic Safety Office / Traffic Records Coordinating Committee on Emergency. Chief Perko, you have the floor on this item.
Thank you, Mayor. This year, we started doing electronic patient care reports. It's a big move across the state with the Department of EMS. So to get some of the departments some funding to get them electronic devices to do these e-reports, they had a tablet grant earlier this year. So we applied for it and we were awarded 2 of them, 1 for each ambulance. And this is to receive them. There's no matching funds. All they ask is that we actually submit the reporting on these particular tablets.
Very good. Are there any questions? Is there a motion?
Yes, Mayor, I move that we adopt Resolution 2018-73, accepting the 2 iPad tablets from the Ohio Department of Public Safety on emergency.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Cameron, second by Mr. Erdl. I seem to have misplaced my copy of the resolution. Oh, okay.
The resolution.
Oh, I see. Okay, very good, thanks. Okay. All right, very good. Is there any discussion on this motion? I'm sorry, is this, and would you modify your motion to include on emergency?
She made on,
Oh,
it
she
was
did?
on emergency.
She did?
yeah.
Oh, very good, thank you, never mind. Okay, if there is no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mr. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good, and then on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good, motion carries. Thank you. Next item is D, motion to allow fire department to apply for a FEMA Fire Prevention and Safety Activities Grant for the purpose of purchasing smoke detectors to be used in the city's residential smoke detector and safety inspection program. Chief Perko, you have the floor.
Yep. Fire Prevention Bureau used to have a residential
Yeah.
smoke detector program. We haven't done that for a number of years. In anticipation of the Bureau opening at the turn of the year, we want to get that up and started, so we're hoping to kickstart it with some funding from FEMA.
Okay, very good. Are there any questions for Chief Perko?
Are these going to be available to the public for free or for a small charge? How?
It would be for free. I think we're going to apply for $100,000, which should give us approximately 4,500 smoke detectors and then batteries, spare batteries for all of them.
That's about the number of households.
Well, you would need multiple per house.
You need one.
Yes, at least.
Would the fire department be installing them also, as they did last time?
Right, when we had the program the last time, we would offer to install them, and then we also conducted a free residential safety inspection.
Cool.
Okay, very nice. Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, sir, thank you. Chief Perko, I think I was like the last person who got a free smoke detector during the previous program. And I'm wondering if, for people like me, we need to upgrade?
Yeah, they only recommend, the manufacturers recommend to replace them every 8 to 10 years, and it's been that time period. So everyone that received one last time, they would be eligible to get one if they haven't replaced it since.
Yikes. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Mr. Rocks?
Chief, I have more of a question. So I had a neighbor who was elderly and she couldn't change the batteries on her smoke detector. And I'm the tallest person on the street, so I did it for her every time, but she's moved away since. But is there a program, could you call the fire department to help if you're an elderly person or have mobility problems to inspect or change the battery in your smoke detector?
Absolutely. We used to also purchase batteries for residents as well. We still do that. I guess we don't really highly promote it. We don't have that amount of batteries in stock. But if they do come in with an issue, we'll ask them how many detectors we have, even if they're only asking about one, and then we'll just replace them all for them at that same time.
I think this is fantastic. It's a no-brainer, and we talked about it last year, and I'm glad we're seeking the grant for that.
Excited.
It's fantastic.
I think this is great.
The Red Cross kick-started us off with some free batteries this year at the open house as well.
Great. Okay, very good, very good. All right, anything further? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Erdl, second by Mr. Rock. Is there any discussion? And if not, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Weisman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Perko. Okay, next item on the agenda is item E, ordinance 2018-71, calling on Congress to amend the United States Constitution to establish that corporations are not people and money is not speech. This is on second reading. I know that there is a modified version that's been passed out that that makes a couple of adjustments to proposed subpart B
Correct.
on section 222-01, changing it from 1 week to 30 days for the clerk of council to send a letter following the biennial public hearing. At the last council meeting, we did not at that time refer this matter to committee. I was thinking in hindsight that perhaps we had or should have, but I do remember that what we did say, what we did say was we wanted to afford an opportunity for the public to reach out to us or to speak at the forum portion of our meeting with respect to this, to provide some additional feedback. While nobody spoke on it this evening, I have heard from some members of the community who are especially interested in this movement. They were excited to hear that we were considering it, and they were quite supportive of the idea of the Democracy Day being held every other year going forward until such time as the Constitution would be amended. I know there was some reticence by some members of council at the last meeting about such an open-ended commitment. This is something we could discuss now, or this is something that we could refer to committee for further discussion, unless in the interim, council feels that they are ready to adopt, in which case, if there's anybody who'd like to speak on this at this point, Mrs. Cameron or someone else, I'm ready to call on you. Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think sending it to committee is a great idea. I'm not sure there's any urgency for this thing. I mean, I think we all can agree in some fashion about this, but I think if it goes to a committee, we'll have a chance to talk where we have more time about these different issues and maybe give another chance for people to come and sort of give their ideas. I know the gentleman in the community who spoke with Councilwoman Cameron has not been here, but perhaps if we have a committee meeting, he could come and give us his thoughts at that point anyway, so.
There's a strong possibility, and just by way of reference, when I made reference to speaking with somebody in the community, it was not him. There were other people. So he is yet to be heard recently on this point. So perhaps committee would be a fine opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Cameron, any thoughts? I know you're a sponsor here, so I don't want to shut you out.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I don't have a problem at all discussing our democratic institutions and putting forward through committee the interests of our people.
Okay.
None whatsoever.
Okay, then I guess the only issue then is the committee to which to assign it. Now, you're the chair of civic information. We could assign it to civic information because you brought.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay, and
Ms. Thomas, if you would give me a date, would you poll everyone for availability? And we'll set a date as soon as we can.
And I would recommend, since we're on second reading, that we go ahead and table and then bring it off the table after it's been through committee.
Certainly.
I would move, Mr. Mayor, that we table this item E, table it, and then for the purpose of sending it to committee.
okay, there's a motion by Mr. Wiseman to table item E so that we can send it to committee. We have a second by, okay, Mrs. Cameron. We'll go with her second. All right. If there's any further discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. This item is tabled while committee considers it. Next item is item F, motion to reject the one bid that was received from Charles Schultz Building Company for the installation of a new City Hall chairlift in the amount of $64,694 and re-advertise on December 6th and December 13th with bids being opened a second time on December 21st. Mr. Cheney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the title says it all. We only received one bid, and I don't think it's a horrible bid, but I just don't like the idea of only having one bidder out there, and we would like to re-advertise and rebid.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Cheney?
Nope.
All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Erdl. There's a second. Okay, is there any further discussion on this matter? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Riddle?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next item is item G, motion to accept the names of council's 2 appointees and 1 citizen member to the newly formed CIC. Before we proceed with that, I would like to recognize our law director, Luke McConville, to bring up a related matter in connection to this. Mr. McConville.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to make council members aware and I guess board members of the CIC aware that my recommendation is that the CIC have legal counsel. Board members and city council needs to be aware that over time, in all likelihood, the city will be entering into contracts with the CIC that are either related to funding of the CIC or that are related to the transfer of particular pieces of property owned by the city to the CIC. And that, as a result, as the city's law director, I would have a technical conflict of interest if I were to represent the CIC. So the CIC will, either need to seek its own legal counsel, or alternatively, both council and the CIC would need to waive the conflict of interest in writing, allowing me to represent both entities and essentially serve as transaction counsel. Because there's so much crossover in membership, this is a situation where it would make sense for there to be one lawyer with the conflict waived, but I certainly don't want to deprive either council or the CIC with the opportunity to think about it and appoint a separate counsel for the CIC if that's your preference.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McConville. So with respect to item G, we should discuss potentially what Mr. McConville's had to say here, but also we'd also be ready to accept a motion with respect to 2 appointees and 1 citizen member. But because that's the item that we have formally advanced on, I don't necessarily want to close that item out before we have an opportunity to talk about CIC matters generally. So if does anybody have any thoughts or anything they'd like to add with respect to what Mr. McConville has just relayed?
Well, I have a question. Wouldn't that be something for the CIC board to discuss at its first meeting rather than this council?
Well, it's really ultimately both. Both parties would have to waive. But yeah, absolutely, the CIC should discuss that at their first meeting. But ultimately, in order for me to function as CIC counsel, both entities would need to be waiving the conflict.
Is there the possibility of entering into any transactions at the first meeting?
No, and no, there isn't, and I've indicated to the mayor that I've been asked by the administration to file the corporate charter with the Secretary of State, which I will do.
It'll be all right, I think.
And I have model documents for all of you to review that will be presented to you prior to that meeting. But in terms of operating in a representative capacity, getting into the business of the CIC, I would not be able to do that.
I really appreciate you bringing this forward at this time. I'm wondering for a timeline, since the CIC is meeting on the 12th, and we have a council meeting the Monday following that, if the CIC can discuss it and decide, and then if they want to waive and can bring it to council on the 19th and waive, and then it's taken care of.
Yeah, I think that timeline makes sense, and I'm certainly not bringing this up to you tonight with the expectation that you would vote on it tonight or even consider it. It's being raised for the first time, but I just wanted to make you aware of it because it's going to be an issue quickly as we get going with the CIC in the new year.
Good, thank you. Very good.
Okay, very good. All right. So that is something for us to all think about and consider. And we do have potential, at least for having the motion to accept 2 appointees and 1 citizen member for the newly formed CIC. I know the CIC is scheduled to meet, I don't have my list right here, but I want to say it's on the
I believe it's the 11th.
12th.
Is it the 12th?
Is it the 11th?
Let's see.
I thought it was the 11th. Is it
It's
the 11th?
Tuesday.
The 11th.
Yes, the 11th. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Purdy.
Mrs. Weiss.
Mrs. Weiss. Okay.
Actually, Kelly.
And Kelly. All right. Okay, very good. Is there a motion with respect to council's appointees?
Mayor, we have not stated who the appointees are,
Right.
so may I state who the appointees are, please?
Oh, yes, please, of
Thank
course.
you.
Mrs. Purdy, you have the
All
floor.
right.
Thank you.
The CIC was to appoint 2 council members and 1 citizen community member. We have selected Michelle Weiss, Mark Weissman, and for the community member, Wynn Weiser. And I would like to say a little bit about each person because we sit with our council colleagues at the table every other week. But just to remind everyone of their qualifications, Michelle Weiss is the controller of Hebrew Academy of Cleveland with both a bachelor's and an MBA from the Boler School of Business at John Carroll. Mrs. Weiss also teaches in the Boler School in the MBA program. She's a founding member of the nonprofit organization Amat's Initiative, which supplements professional development for principals, and was appointed a commissioner for the Ohio Commission on Service and Volunteerism. Prior to being elected to City Council, we saw Mrs. Weiss often because she attended council meetings as a League of Women Voter observer. Mark Weissman is a staff attorney for the Cleveland Municipal Court Housing Division. With an undergraduate degree in marketing from the Max M. Fisher College of Business at Ohio State University, he completed his JD at Cleveland Marshall College of Law. As a 20-year attorney and project manager, he has extensive experience establishing new and improving existing programs. His most recent publication is Consumer Courage, the Big Book of Ohio Consumer Rights.
I've read that book.
Extremely useful for all of us. Wynn Weiser, the community representative, is the director of undergraduate programs and a lecturer at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State. She has a BA in Urban Studies and a master's in Public Administration from Cleveland State University. Wynn is a member of the Government Finance Officers Organization, American Society for Public Administration, Northeast Ohio, and American Public Works Association. Just a few of the honors awarded her include Excellence in Teaching from the National Society of Leadership and Success, and the National Public Administration Honorary from Phi Alpha Alpha, the Global Honor Society for Public Affairs and Administration. I think we have an outstanding set of nominations that I would like to recommend Council adopt for the CIC in its inaugural. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Purdy. And I agree. Excellent choices. Is there any discussion or is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to adopt the nominees.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the nominees of Michelle Weiss, Mark Weissman, and Wynn Weiser. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mrs. Purdy, second by Mr. Rock. Is there any discussion? Well, if there's no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Purdy?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Very good. Thank you. Next item is item H, motion accepting the recommendation from Mayor and Health Insurance Committee to renew the existing medical mutual health insurance plans and the existing Guardian Insurance, Dental Insurance, and Life Insurance plans, and authorizing the Mayor and Finance Director to enter the necessary contracts for city employee health insurance. Now, There is a memo from James Goff in council packet, but I also have from his department report to council a few items I'll just read into the record here. Since September, the Health Insurance Committee has met 3 times in order to fulfill its role of providing input from bargaining and non-bargaining employees in the decision which plans to choose for the city's renewal of health insurance, dental insurance, and life insurance. For a detailed comparison of the quotes for the various plans and providers the Health Insurance Committee reviewed, please see the memo in the council packet. The mayor concurred with the Health Insurance Committee's recommendation to accept renewal of our current plans at a 0% rate increase. Fully insured health insurance purchased directly from Medical Mutual, and dental insurance and life insurance purchased from Guardian Insurance. While the total premium costs will not increase for the same plans, the employee share of premiums for health insurance and dental insurance will increase to 12% for 2019 as per the current union collective bargaining agreements. So that would be the extent of Mr. Goff's report on this point. And to confirm what Mr. Goff did right there, yes, I do recommend as mayor that we proceed with the renewal of the existing Medical Mutual Health Insurance Plan and the existing Guardian Insurance, dental insurance, and life insurance plans. So, if there are any questions or comments, anybody have anything they'd care to discuss? And if there is not, is there a motion? Mr. Wiseman, do you have something?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Oh, okay. It looked like you were about to ask.
Another item from my diary.
Well, I always look like I'm about to say something.
Yes.
So I would make a motion, Mr. Mayor, that we, make sure I do the right thing, accept the recommendations from the mayor and the Health Insurance Committee to renew the existing medical mutual health insurance plans and existing Guardian Insurance, dental insurance, and life insurance plans, and authorizing the mayor and finance director to enter the necessary contracts for city employees' health insurance.
Very good. Motion by Mr. Wiseman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Erdl. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next item is item I, ordinance 2018-72, transfers on emergency. From Mr. Goff, the Finance Department is requesting authorizations to make transfers from the general fund to the street maintenance fund of $100,000, to the police pension fund of $10,000, and to the fire pension fund of $10,000. The appropriations for these transfers were previously approved by City Council. Are there any questions, or is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve ordinance 2018-72, transfers on emergency.
We have a motion by Mrs. Pardee. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we will take 2 votes. First on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Item J from the agenda has been removed, so we will proceed to item K, which is a motion to hold an executive session immediately following this regular meeting for the purpose of discussing personnel, legal, and/or real estate matters. We do have a real estate matter / legal matter to discuss. So if we could have a motion now to go, well, to have an executive session following the regular meeting for that purpose.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Motion by Mr. Wiseman and second by Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mrs. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries, and we'll have an executive session following the regular meeting portion of this meeting. First report is finance. As mentioned earlier, Mr. Goff is not here. I've read portions of his report already. To finish out what his report, I'll read the following into the record. The 2017 audit report. The city has received notification from the Ohio auditors state that the 2017 audit report for the city of University Heights will be officially released on December 4, 2018. That is tomorrow.
Okay.
2019 temporary appropriations. At the December 17 meeting, City Council should expect to receive a temporary appropriations ordinance for 2019. The Finance Department anticipates the 2019 temporary appropriations will include operating expenses for a period lasting no longer than January 1, 2019 through March 31st, 2019, but the 2019 temporary appropriations will not include capital purchases. Implementation of the VIP Fusion accounting and payroll system. The Finance Department is currently building the account codes into the new VIP Fusion system for implementation of the new accounting system and new payroll system. The accounting system portion will go live as of January 1, 2019. Payroll system portion might not go live until mid-January 2019. Until the payroll system portion is ready to go live, employees will continue to be paid via ADP. In the next few weeks, the Finance Department will bring implementation of the asset management portion of the VIP Fusion system and begin an internal audit of all capital assets as well as non-capital assets that should be tracked for insurance purposes. And that concludes Mr. Goff's report. Next report would be law. Mr. McConville.
Council, I want to provide a brief update on two litigation items. The first is that the city has been served with a lawsuit alleging that a motorist was obstructed on Groveland Road by a condition known to the city and thereby ran into a tree. We've referred that to Norma. Norma has accepted representation, and so the matter is being conducted by our insurance counsel. Other than to say that we believe the city has full defenses, I'm not going to comment further since it is a matter of pending litigation. And secondly, as a reminder, the Housing Center filed a couple of fair housing complaints in the city, and as you may recall, that prompted us to staff our Fair Housing Board. We are in the process of selecting a date to conduct a meeting between the parties in the hopes of reaching a mediated resolution. We are looking at the 18th or 19th of December. We're sort of zeroing in on those dates. And if we are not able to reach a resolution of the matter at that time, then the matter will be referred to the board for a hearing. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions for Mr. McConville? All right, very good. Public safety, we'll start with police. Chief Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm going to report on 3 items tonight. Before I start my report, I just want to indicate also that due to call volumes and work obligation, the police blotter was not available today. We'll be ready for you tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief.
Good evening. The report, first item I'd like to report on is Shop with a Cop, which is a community engagement opportunity I've discussed with committees and other meetings so far this year. With the time that the Office of Community Policing was created and with the resources they have, I regret to report that this year it just was not possible to implement the program known as Shop with a Cop. To provide a little more specifics, this type of program and engaging opportunity requires a significant amount of planning, not just for the event itself, but to accommodate and create revenue resources for fundraising throughout a year period to we create typically around $100 to $150 for juveniles and youth from the community to then go shop for their parents during Christmas, and they do so obviously with a law enforcement officer. Specifically during this type of event, it's common for to be an evening event where the juveniles would meet with law enforcement representatives at a location for food and refreshments. And then from that location, they would take part in a type of procession with multiple police cars driving to the store location where they would actually take part in shopping then. And again, given that type of event, we just did not have the time and the resources. for this year, but we are working on it as we speak for next year. And it's a community engagement opportunity that I expect that will be implemented next year around holidays. So. Next item I'd like to report on is hiring update. We are scheduled to have 2 officers sworn in on January 2nd. Once that occurs, they will start a 2-week orientation process, then followed by approximately 4 months of field training. That leaves us 2 additional positions that still need to be filled. At this time, efforts are ongoing in terms of the background checks for additional candidates, so we're still working on that process. Final item I'd like to report on comes as a result of efforts of Councilwoman Weiss, who arranged not just University Heights city representatives, but also from Cleveland Heights and Beechwood, where she arranged for the police chiefs, the prosecutors, the mayors, and members of council to be introduced and presented with what can be a very valuable service in the community and for us to use as a law enforcement agency known as NALA. What this is a non-profit organization that's focused on the emotional and mental well-being of the Cleveland Jewish community with an emphasis on at-risk youth. And they do so, they complete their mission through a process of referrals, support, advocacy, and education. So again, very grateful that Councilwoman Weiss was able to put this together. As many tools as we can get in the field, obviously as law enforcement agencies can help us and also have, without a doubt, a positive impact on the community. So thank you again. And that is my report.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And are there any questions for Chief Rogers? Okay. If there are none, I'll also thank Mrs. Weiss for setting up that meeting. Thank you, Chief. Public Safety Fire, Chief Perko.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I just want to report that this past Thursday, we had another good turnout for our CPR class, which was hosted at the library. Talked to the library about some planning for next year. We're going to do one quarterly, one in January, April, July, and October. We'll get those rolled out on social media and the city webpage. During the open house event that we had a coloring contest. We have those winners announced, and part of the prize for those that won that were residents were to get picked up in the fire truck for a ride to school. So we'll be giving those families a call this week and setting up a date to allow the child and one of their parents to ride with us and take them to school.
Are they allowed to just totally blow through that school zone or what? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
No.
Okay.
And lastly, I just want to thank you all again for your support today. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Chief. All right. Next up is Service, Mr. Picorni.
Thank you, Mayor. Without repeating everything the mayor had mentioned earlier about leaflet collection, we are out there. We are continuing with at least 2 crews and sometimes 3 crews going around the city. We will be continuing our overtime effort as long as the weather cooperates and it's productive to do so. So we will get through the city eventually here on leaf collection. Second item I wanted to report on were the 2 tree contracts which council approved. Contract 2018-1, which was the 40 tree removal, Raymont, Washington area. That is approximately 60% complete, and they will have the rest of that work done probably before the first of the year. 2018-3, which was the large tree pruning program, is just about to get started. That will do the portion of the city to the south and west, which is from Eaton to Warrensville, from Meadowbrook to Fairmont. And hopefully we'll get that started probably, again, just about the same time as the other one completes, January 1st.
Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni? Mrs. Weiss?
Thank you. I had one quick question. Is that traffic light by Heinen's going to start blinking again? Because
I didn't understand the question.
Oh, no,
that might be police, yeah?
I understand the question, and that is something we can make happen. Yes.
It's still on flash.
Oh, no, it's probably,
It's not
Yeah,
going
it's
to
not.
flash in evenings, yeah, we
Yeah.
changed that. I assumed it was changed back to completion of construction, but if it hasn't, I'll change it.
Yeah, it wasn't changed. Thank
yes,
you.
we changed that because during the construction.
Right, yeah, no, I knew that.
People couldn't see, right, okay. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Any other questions for Mr. Picorni? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Picorni. Next was the building commissioner, Mr. McReynolds. You have the floor.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McReynolds. Next is city engineer, Mr. Cheney.
No report, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cheney. Next is communications and civic engagement.
Quick report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Peanut Butter Drive continues through Friday. I think we're at the point now where everyone knows about it. It's just a matter of, oh yeah, I need to bring my peanut butter in. So hopefully we'll get a lot more by Friday, and we'll get to the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. We're working on revisions to the website. We have a couple drafts of that. The mayor and I are going to sit down probably this week, review that, and show it to council. And we'll, hopefully, we can have that, in theory, just, you know, a facelift to the website by the first of the year. And finally, the mayor mentioned some of these, so I won't repeat, but we have some upcoming events in addition to the ones the mayor mentioned during his report. The Bicycle Citizens Committee will meet on January 17th. Scott Kuboff is president, who's leading that, and he's decided to hold this at 8 p.m. at the Wine Spot in Cleveland Heights. On January 22nd, the Parks and Rec Committee will meet here in council chambers at 6:30. One project I'm working with Patrick on is a realtor's breakfast on February 6th at the University Heights Library. That'll be at 9 a.m. You might be familiar with this. Other communities have done this for years. I'm not sure when the last time we've done one here at University Heights, or if we've ever done one.
Oh, it's been a long time, but we did them,
And
yes.
it's just an opportunity for, you know, realtors are obviously on the front line selling University Heights, so it would be helpful to us to hear, you know, what they have to say, and also would help them do their job to hear about things we're doing in the city. Earlier, it was a month ago, we had a real estate agent drop by City Hall, and we talked in my office with the mayor, and one thing that she was unaware of was the tax payment for improvements to your homes, and she also did a cartwheel in my office. So I think by letting real estate agents, you know and get very well briefed on that, I think that can lead to good things for the city. The mayor mentioned the State of the City on the 13th, and the 14th, we haven't worked out the details yet, but it is the mayor's intention to let people get married here if they're interested. City Hall on Valentine's Day, so get people get married, and or if white folks are interested in doing their vows, they can.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cook. And yes, while we do conduct weddings here at City Hall throughout the year, and even today on about a half hour's notice, as Rachel can attest to, we wanted to do something special on February 14th this year, that afternoon, just to see what kind of interest is out there for special Valentine's Day weddings here at City Hall. Also, just to clarify and expound on Mr. Cook's comments about the meetings of the Bicycle Committee and the Parks and Recs Committee. These are mayor's committees that I sought volunteers for earlier in the year. The Bicycle Committee has met. The citizens who have volunteered for that have met informally and are meeting again coming up here in January, and the folks who volunteered for Parks and Rec to advise me on ideas that the citizens may want for improving our parks and recreational opportunities. We're looking forward to convening that committee as well. So, very good. I'm sorry, were there any questions for Mr. Cook before we proceed with economic development? Okay, if not, then Susan Drucker, Economic Development, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This past week, I completed and submitted the CDSG grant application for its storefront renovation program. I'm also in the stages of writing an internal storefront renovation program, our guidelines, what the city would follow to be presented. I'm looking for presenting that to council by the beginning of the new year. Also, Small Business Saturday was successful. Several businesses have expressed their appreciation to the cities, thanking the mayor and you council members for the promotion and for the advertising. A few of them said that they did see an uptick in business. And as the mayor had mentioned, now we're going to use this program as a springboard, creating some other type of program, leaning towards having something by spring that would include all of our businesses, all the businesses throughout, even a small business or even some of the franchises who would like to participate. So just thinking of some different ideas. As I said, maybe keep it a little similar, but maybe put a little bit more, have a little different spin on it. And I'll be bringing that to council as well. I'm continuing to work on the zoning code with Patrick with a focus on the mixed-use district. And then Rosita's Fashion Boutique, which is a new clothing store that opened this weekend on Sunday. That is located at 2243 Warrensville Center Road. So that's a new retail shop we have here. And for those of you who are celebrating, Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you, Mrs. Drucker. The Rosita's, that's in the old frame store, is that right?
That's the old frame store, right?
Okay.
Right next to Adams Barber Shop.
Okay, very good. That didn't stay open, that didn't stay open for long. That's great. I mean, as far as
They actually moved. They're actually in the basement of that building.
Oh, they are?
Frame shop.
Okay.
So then, they just need a little smaller space, and then so then Rosita's opened up, which is
Yes.
I was just in there today. It's a very nice shop. They renovated the whole inside.
Okay. No, that's great. What I really meant to say was the space that the frame shop was in was not vacant for very long. So that's very good.
No, there was a quick turnaround on that.
Yes.
Unfortunate.
All right, excellent. Any questions for Mrs. Drucker? Okay. Well, thank you for all your work on a Small Business Saturday. I was happy to participate in it myself.
I know the mayor's wearing a suit that he bought on Small Business Saturday, so
Yes.
stand up
Oh,
and spin.
I guess. All right, so yes, I went to K's for Men on Cedar Road, right over there. So it's fun. That particular store reminds me a lot of a store from my hometown called Schaefer's, which closed a long time ago now, it seems. But it's certainly kind of a throwback from a different time, and certainly there are some things there you can't really get anywhere else. So it's worth checking out. All right, next is community development, or I should say housing and community development, and I have Mr. Grogemeyer's report. The Housing and Community Development Department is setting up its office on the second floor of the Building Department building. We look forward to working with council, residents, and community stakeholders to strengthen the city's housing stock. Next, the work to rip up the city's portion of the parking lot at the old KFC is scheduled to begin tomorrow, Tuesday, December 4th. The work is scheduled to be completed by the end of the week. Third, NOACA staff will be in the Cedar Taylor Business District this week conducting a parking study as part of the Taylor Road TLCI study. That would be Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative study. More information about the study and dates of future public meetings can be found at www.noaca, that's noaca.org/Taylor. Respectfully submitted, Patrick Grogan-Myers.
Mayor,
Yes.
if I may, there was one other item that I thought Patrick was going to be reporting on tonight that he and I discussed that I just want to make council aware of.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Council may recall about 6 or so weeks ago, you passed an ordinance that carved out the parking garage parcels from the CRA. And the city needs to, in order to modify the CRA, formally submit that legislation along with a few other materials, including a revised map, to the Ohio Department of Development. But before we could do that, we needed to advertise the ordinance that was passed for a period of 2 weeks. And going back a month or so ago, I believe Patrick placed that ad, but it's not clear whether the ad actually ever ran. And he was going to be following up on that. If it's run, if the ad has run, then we won't have a problem submitting that to the Ohio Department of Development within the 60-day window that they provide us. You have 60 days from passage of the ordinance. But if it hasn't run, we're going to need to run it yet, and we will be asking council to affirm the prior passage of its ordinance either by motion or resolution. We haven't worked out exactly how we would do that, but I just wanted to make you aware that that's a possibility coming up on an agenda, and didn't want you to be confused or alarmed by why that was coming back to you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions
I have a
for the law
question.
director on that? Mrs. Weiss?
So because of that, that's probably holding up paperwork for residents also then, right? If anyone wants to submit anything?
Well, no, it should, it really, our CRA exists. So anyone who has a project they want to make us aware of can go ahead and do that. We are still finalizing our application form, but those two are really unconnected because the current CRA exists, and anyone who has a project as of the time that the ordinance was created would be eligible for the program.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Wiseman?
If I may, I'm asking because I've had several people approach me, and I'm struggling for a concrete, correct answer to give them. So if they had an open project as of the date we adopted the CRA ordinance, they qualify for the tax break.
Correct.
Okay, and that date was?
It was in July, so whenever the July special meeting was, I'd have to go back and see precisely when that was. But Kelly, do you happen to recall when the July meeting was? Okay.
It's okay. So,
But whatever that July special meeting was.
If it was open in July, as they can finish now.
Oh, yes.
And there's no rush to get it done by the end of the year, but we're still waiting for the rate forms to be created.
Yeah, and we have draft forms where we should have those finalized, but people who want to apply should feel free to inquire, and we'll make sure that we're walking them through the process.
And they should call?
I think they should call Patrick Grogan Myers. That would be my suggestion, or they can call the mayor.
Yes, or...
So what happens when you don't show up? You're the guy
Well,
everybody says, call him.
Yes. Although I know that Patrick is looking at changing his class schedule for next semester, so hopefully that won't be as much of an issue. I also know that Patrick is working with Mr. McReynolds with respect to that, because ultimately, while Patrick's been working on these forms, it will be the building department that will be administering this. So at some point, those questions will rightly be directed to Mr. McReynolds, but I would suggest we not do that until we have those forms more fully in place.
Okay.
We can pile on Patrick because he's not here tonight.
I appreciate that. At least this gives me the start where I can send somebody, because I've had several people approach me. Do I finish? What am I doing? I'm waiting. So, but now we're
No, they
ready,
should, yes,
basically.
if they're ready to be inspected and cleared by the building department, they should go ahead and do that, and then, work on the paperwork in the new year.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. I think that was, were there any further, oh, no, I'm sorry, council. I knew that was missing. All right, building. Councilman Wiseman, do you have a report?
Boy, I would just love to say no report. I'll be quick. On Wednesday, we're having a meeting to discuss the residents of the city and suggestions that they have to the administration for how to focus the new housing department and the new housing inspectors in terms of what their view of the growing tenant population is. We've heard several times from the landlords about what their ideas are, what their positions are. This is not specifically just for the rental fee ordinance, but for, excuse me, overall ideas for the residents. I have my own perceptions of the rental, of the tenant population, as do all the other council members. But this gives us an idea to get a more thorough view of what the residents happen to think. So we're going to entertain their thoughts on a Wednesday and go from there. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Civic information.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One more thing. I'm honored to be on council, but further honored to be a part of the CIC. Thank you to my colleagues for recommending me, and Mrs. Weiss can opine at this point. I know the vice mayor is also a member of the CIC, so you didn't. I want everybody to know that, right? There's going to be 3 members of council, and I think we're equally impressed to be with your credentials, Ms. Vice Mayor, to have you on there as well. So it's going to be it's very good. I think it represents a good chance for us to do some interesting things in the city we haven't been able to do really ever to date, and it's really good. So I'm glad we're moving forward. Then I think it's going to give us a good opportunity to have a nice effect on the city.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Next would be civic information. Chair is Councilwoman Pamela Cameron, who I know had to step out on a personal matter. Apart from the reference to her committee of a matter that was tabled today, and I know that she's going to be setting a meeting either for this month or next on that. I don't know, does anybody have anything that they want to report on behalf of Pam Cameron this evening? Okay, very good. Moving along then, Finance, Sue Purdy.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. The Finance Committee made a yeoman's attempt to get the budget done. We wanted to get it done by the end of the calendar year. We tried. We actually had one meeting, but it was not to be. We are tabling the Finance Committee meetings and the Finance Advisory Committee meetings that were originally scheduled tonight and on the 17th, I believe, was the next one. We'll set up meetings in January and really delve into this. Finance Advisory will be working with us again. If you have suggestions, I'd like to increase the Finance Advisory. This is a good time to do it. We're setting up the budget. It will be January. So send me any names of people who might be good people in the community to be a part of this. Typically, they have some financial background, accounting, cost accounting, an MBA, business experience. Just let me know. Also, I would ask that you shoot me an email and let me know if there's any night you can't meet, like you're teaching, or you have a standing meeting, so we can start to schedule and start the polls, I guess. Okay, I would hope we can do this in about 3 meetings, and maybe we'll cancel the 3rd. I think that's it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Purdy. And I'd like to take an opportunity to thank you also for the honest effort that we did make to try to make this budget happen, before the end of the calendar year. But at the same time, while it was going to be close if we were going to do that, with Mr. Goff having the foot surgery on Friday, it became evident that it was a bridge too far to try to get that done and to not have him physically present at meetings. And this would be his first budget here at the city as our finance director, and we wanted to afford him the opportunity to be fully engaged and fully present for this process. So I appreciate the indulgence of the Finance Committee and the Joint Advisory Committee, or the Advisory Committee, to allow this, and also the indulgence of council to have temporary appropriations into the new year so that we can have this process the way we ought. So
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's far better to take our time with it. And actually, you reminded me, Mr. Cook, if you would put something out the way you do on social media about Finance Advisory, that would be wonderful, because that's another great way to reach out into the community. Thank you.
Yes. All right, next report, Governmental Affairs, Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have a meeting coming up on December 10th to discuss a possible ordinance about changing the age of purchasing tobacco and vaping products in the city.
Okay.
And I also want to thank my colleagues for the CIC nomination. I think, as Councilman Wiseman said, that it's going to be a great benefit to the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Next is Recreation, Mr. Ertl.
No report, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ertl. Next is Safety, Mr. Ruck.
Yes, Mayor, we have a meeting Wednesday before the building committee meeting, so we're at 6 o'clock in the conference room. We originally penciled that date in for last minute discussions on the ladder truck. Had we not passed that today, but since we did, we can actually not have that conversation anymore. We can continue our conversation on some of the items that we had tabled earlier on in the season, such as the dog leash ordinance and other particular items. So, good the agenda out hopefully tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Rock. Next is Service and Utilities, Mr. Sims. Mr. Sims is not with us this evening. Does anybody have a report on his behalf? Okay, seeing none. Next is Committee of the Whole. Mrs. Pardee, anything to add?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, this concludes the regular portion of the meeting. We do have an executive session coming up, so if we could use this time to do that. For those of you who are leaving and won't be sticking around for afterwards, I wish you all a happy Hanukkah. Thank you very much for your being here, and thank you for your engagement here in the community and being part of this meeting.
Mayor.